Well, somebody's had plenty of, I have to say, experience with the public sector. Not in this way, not in a GVOM skimming way, but I'm sure that there'd be plenty of times when Tim Groser would have struck difficult situations that he would have had to deal with in a managerial capacity, or at least be aware of. Is Tim Groser, former diplomat, former Minister of Trade in this country, former National MP and National Cabinet Minister, and he joins us now. Tim, I know we're going to be talking about COP30 and all that, but you must be looking at what's coming out in Wellington at the moment and be slightly agog, mustn't you?
Michael, I know this might sound a little off, but honestly, I don't spend a lot of time following day-to-day politics in New Zealand. I'm just focused on a few other matters, and that's genuinely the truth.
Okay. Oh, well, all right. Well, the rest of us are agog. You're not. Okay. Fair enough. Where are you based, though? Still in
Well,
Wellington?
I probably would be agog if I spent the time that you guys have to spend worrying about every twist in the news cycle, but because I don't, I just am neutral on it.
Oh, I think corruption at the upper reaches of the police is probably something you could consider yourself, Tim, with as
Yeah, yeah,
important,
yeah,
to
yeah.
be fair.
Okay. I
All right.
wasn't even aware, by the way. Anyway, carry on.
Okay, well, you probably will go and search the media after this anyhow. Listen, mate, COP30, that's what I wanted to talk to you about this morning. It's I'm not sure if it's finished yet in Brazil. It certainly started with the crash being wallop when the president of Brazil got stuck into all the people who weren't there, and the number of people who aren't there, world leaders who aren't there. Gosh, that would make a list all of its own. Can you just take me through, if you could, Tim? Um, is the rest of the world taking COP seriously anymore? It looks from afar, and I'm not there. You will know better than I. It looks from afar that the world has decided that these COP conferences is, well, somebody I just send lesser functionaries to now, and we're just going to get on and do our own thing. Have I got that right or wrong?
I think you're broadly correct, but before we go any further, I think I should lay a couple of things on the table. Now, I do know that people that listen to your excellent program, um, there are quite a few climate change skeptics amongst them, so they've got to know where I'm coming from. First of all, I am not a climate change skeptic. I'm a great skeptic of many of the policies that climate change catastrophists advocate, but on the underlying science, I'm not a skeptic. I think it's real. The
Well, can
second
I
thing
just can
to
I just
Oscar,
clarify that too from your point of view? You and I have views that concur on that issue, so
oh, good,
we're not
okay,
at variance.
um, is that I'm also an internationally, well, no, a nationally convicted climate change criminal. And I've been convicted as a climate change criminal by no less than my 10-year-old granddaughter. And I thought you might enjoy this absolutely true anecdote. So, about 4 years ago, when she was about 10, I live in an apartment opposite what most people call Thorndon Primary School, but
Mm,
I call it the Independent Socialist Republic of Thorndon Primary School,
mm.
where they don't have classes, they have syndicates of about 70 children of mixed age, and they don't have,
Ah, yes.
they
Yeah.
have teachers sort of wandering around, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. The open
I pick her up
classroom.
after
Mm.
school. Yeah, yeah, just absurd. I was always in favor of the teachers' unions wanting smaller classes, but apparently that's very old fashioned. Anyway, so I pick her up after school, feed her, because you know how voraciously hungry children of that age are after school. And I ask her, well, what did you study today at school? Now, I wasn't so naive, Michael, as to think she was going to say reading, writing, and arithmetic, okay? But she said climate change, all right? 10 years old. So I said to it, did you know, darling, that I used to be the Minister of Climate Change? And I swear to God this is truth. She looked at me with a death stare that would have done Chloe Swarbrick or Greta Thunberg proud and said to me, so why didn't you fix it, Grandpa? So there you are. I've been convicted for not fixing climate change, but I just want to get that off my chest so our readers, our listeners know where we're coming from.
No, and she's been nicely propagandized, hasn't she, by her teaching fraternity?
Well, you'd have to assume it, wouldn't you?
Mm, mm.
So on the
Um.
COP question,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, 50,000 people. But I've seen it several times. I've been to many COPs. And I mean, when I went to my first COP, I simply could not believe it. I don't want to give you a history lesson, but for a number of reasons, and also don't forget, although I was new to climate change in 2008, I had spent 30 years in professional trade negotiations. So, I know what international political meetings and negotiations are about. And after the inevitable collapse of the absurd Copenhagen 2009 climate change summit, I went there with John Key as the Prime Minister. And I mean, I could spend time explaining why it was utterly absurd and almost certain to fail. I was asked at the next COP in Cancun, Mexico, to facilitate a process of picking up the broken pieces of the puzzle. So, and the reason I was chosen was because the Mexican Foreign Ministry told their foreign minister that, do you realize you got somebody with a ministerial title who's a properly trained professional chair, facilitator, negotiator? So they knew that from my work in Geneva on trade. So I go into a room, and there's two people in this room. The United States Special Envoy for Climate Change, Todd Stern, essentially Obama's climate change minister, and China's outstanding nuclear physicist and minister responsible, Xi Jinping. And I sit down with these little tiny New Zealand, with the US and the China, both of whom had been completely ignored by the whole COP process in practical terms the previous year, and start to map out a situation that might lead to a long-term global agreement. The other 10,000 people at that conference were essentially irrelevant. So, I mean, I don't think Simon Watts had any alternative politically to go to this meeting, because the climate change far left would have assumed that he was a fascist denier if he'd not gone to the circus. But I don't think that's any longer the solution. The solution, as always, is technology. That's my broad position.
Okay. You mentioned, I think, 50,000 people. Is that right? Going to COP
I'm
30.
relying on the I'm relying on the economists' estimate. Apparently, it's just
Okay. Well,
got
that's
bigger and bigger
yeah.
and bigger.
Well, that's fair enough. They're usually fairly authoritative, the economists.
Yeah.
So, yeah, actually, I can tell you 56,118 delegates are registered. It's the
Oh my
second
God.
largest COP in history. COP 28 in
Yeah.
Dubai, 80,000 people went to it.
And, and from
So,
memory, there were
yeah.
about 140 Palestinian delegates there. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you?
Oh, listen, there were 14 representing Rangatahi from the Iwi Leaders Forum. 14, 1-4. And that's just that's just the youth section of the Iwi Leaders Forum in this country. Listen, the extraordinary thing though is, do they ever achieve anything, Tim?
Well, they did in 2015 by putting together a deal, the core of which, let us not forget, was based on the New Zealand proposal, because both China and the United States said the New Zealand proposal was the only basis they could accept for the long-term agreement. So there was 4 years of negotiation. The utter failure of Copenhagen, based on the fallacy of, you put 110 political global leaders together, 110 heads of state or heads of government together, and it becomes too big to fail, except they forgot to produce a negotiating text. So utter failure, followed by 4 years of COPs, which did produce a success in Paris. So the answer is a qualified yes. They have
Well,
occasionally.
when you say a success in Paris, this is an agreement amongst all that they're going to reduce greenhouse emissions. New Zealand is being criticised for backsliding on some of that. And there is a suggestion we may even end up at an international court of justice from some of our climate scientists who believe that, you know, we are somehow responsible for mass genocide, or going to be anyhow.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary but true. I mean, it's absolutely amazing that is the suggestion. Can I ask though, is New Zealand, do you think, where are we in the pack? We wanted to be, under the previous government, essentially leading being one of the leaders in climate change policy. Would we be in the middle now, do you think, Tim, in terms of being a sort of fast follower or just somebody that's
I
sloping along?
mean, look, if you relied on pure data about our emissions, frankly, I don't know where we would be. But the fundamental fallacy behind those ludicrous scores you've referred to is they don't understand the implications of the NDC concept, which is that it is not an internationally binding commitment. It is a nationally determined and politically binding agreement, and it was designed by New Zealand and accepted by China and the United States only because it was not internationally binding. This is a framework that allows each country to decide what is the appropriate level of emissions in terms of the possibilities and trade-offs open to them, which varies vastly country by country, which is why simple-minded country comparisons are so ridiculous. And really, it's an issue of every country to work out their own pathway through the green transition, through the energy transition. And I don't want to stop this program without mentioning what I'm doing with some fantastic people, some of our globally leading scientists, to actually tackle a massive opportunity for New Zealand, which is in supercritical geothermal energy. I just came back with Shane Jones from the large US geothermal conference a week or so ago. And so New Zealand is providing technological leadership in something that offers enormous climate change, but it won't be reflected in some simple-minded number that these climate change catastrophists keep on referring to.
All right. Well, just a little bit further on that. The Jessica Pellerate, who is leading, suggested, well, she's part of this group of lawyers, climate change lawyers that call themselves, and says this. And I've heard
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same argument from the outgoing climate change chairman, Dr. Rod Carr. They say that we've entered free, and you'd be aware of this, we've entered free trade agreements with the European Union and with the United Kingdom that require us to effectively implement the Paris Agreement. Now, Rod Carr made the same threat too. He says, if we are seen to fall foul of that, it opens New Zealand up to the possibility of trade sanctions. Can I ask you, Tim, who's been intimately involved in these, is that a realistic possibility?
It's bollocks. The only thing that
Okay.
would open up that clause, and I don't have the exact wording of the EU New Zealand FTA in front of me, which I think is a terrific FTA, by the way. What it requires us to do is to participate in the Paris process, which is why I've been so opposed to people on the far right advocating withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. That would quite, I would say, very likely trigger sanctions under that FTA. But as long as we don't make that ridiculous schoolboy error of withdrawing from the actual agreement and stick to what we have agreed, which is determining ourselves our own nationally determined contribution, that is never going to happen under the wording of that agreement.
We are being characterized abroad by some of, again, the climate change activists, lawyers, policymakers, professors, that we're getting bad headlines overseas for quote unquote backsliding on the climate. And you could see countries wanting to make an example of us, claim these individuals. You'd say that's bollocks as well too, would you?
Yeah, look, it's just we all know the game, Michael. The climate change fanatics who think there's only one objective in life, and that is that New Zealand must lead the way with its stellar commitments that won't be met, and then the rest of the world think, oh my God, that is just wonderful, we must follow New Zealand, versus the reality that we are trying to now engineer a essentially bipartisan commitment to a green transition. This is not straightforward, but the climate change catastrophists think there's no other objectives like putting food on the table, like sustaining New Zealand's population so they don't all go to Australia. And therefore, they feed this information to these international lawyers for climate change justice, or whatever they're called, who then reprint this. But it's all come from New Zealand sources, from extremist sources. I don't take it seriously. I don't even listen to it.
No, fair enough. But unfortunately, they're picked up by, let's just say, Radio New Zealand News, Tim, who have a climate
Oh,
change
yeah.
correspondent, who lovingly broadcast and amplify this as if it is the truth. I mean, our media are not helping us in this country on that issue.
No, of course not, because there's no media interest in moderate, sensible commentary on the issues that a serious government has to take into account in trying to maintain employment, export income, and do something to stem the outflow of New Zealanders to Australia and increase our total factor productivity. They don't care about any of this. Okay, so that's just, we have to live with that.
Well, or resist it. But certainly,
Yeah.
going back to your 10-year-old daughter, it's enough to scare the teacher, and then the teacher scares the kids. And that is, as a large
Yep.
one, you would expect them to get those sources from, the mainstream media in this country on that issue. All right.
Correct.
Listen,
Yep.
you've mentioned it just quietly, and we've talked about it before, but I am interested in the supercritical or super hot geothermal energy that you've been looking at. How
Yep.
far advanced have you since we last talked on this issue?
We're making very steady progress. We have set up quite a complicated structure. We are in very close liaison, working very closely with the iwi, who's are the landowners of the site that we've chosen on the basis of scientific advice, not as a political matter. That's Rotokawa, which is incredibly promising by international standards. And we're working through some very complicated engineering issues with engineers, New Zealand engineers from Contact and Mercury, and scientists from Earth Sciences, formerly GNS. So, it's not like we've cracked the problem, but we're making very steady progress since we got the money from this government to drill the first of these 3 experimental wells. And there's a very considerable interest internationally in what New Zealand is doing, because if we can be the first country in the world to crack this essentially unlimited source of renewable energy, this will have global consequences. To illustrate this, I mean, if you go onto the Department of Energy, US Department of Energy website, to the GTO, Geothermal Technologies Office, which is part of this vast US federal energy department, they say, given our estimate of the amount of supercritical energy that is available in the United States, utilizing only 1% of this would be equal to 4 times total installed electricity in the United States. Now, as I said to a conference yesterday in Rotorua, even if this is wildly exaggerated, this tells us that this is an enormous issue. And it comes down essentially, Michael, to what is happening around it. Let's talk about the United States, because Trump has made all these anti-Paris Agreement statements, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, not sending senior people there. The real issue is, what are the giant tech companies going to do? As you know, there is this explosive need for electricity as a result of AI. And there's been some cumulative $500 billion of investment last year, an absolutely mind-boggling number of in AI technologies. So the question is, are they going to go back to fossil fuel to power this? Now, there's a mixed evidence on this, but it's perfectly clear to me that many of the big tech people and companies like Bill Gates, like Bezos, they're looking through this last kick of the climate change denier that the president represented in his statements. And I don't think for a minute they're going to put billions of dollars into fueling their AI electricity demands with fossil fuel. They actually are interested in renewable energy. So, what's the role of international agreements in this? Let me just give you a beautiful statistic that shows, I think, a lot. If you look at the United States emissions in 1990 and you look at them in 2025, they're about the same. In other words, US emissions have flatlined, but the US economy has grown by 1/3. So what the United States has done is decouple the growth of their economy from the growth of their emissions. And that, broadly speaking, is what has to happen now in China, and is happening if you look at the data. So look, are we absolutely on track to the real objective, which was never 1.5, if you look at the wording, and I could explain the psychology of that drafting because I was there at the conferences leading up to it. The real objective was never 1.5, and the wording was quite clear that it's not. It's, quote, holding the increase to well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5. So are we on track? If you straight line extrapolate that, no, but we are absolutely bending the curve and there is unmistakable progress. But the climate change catastrophists never want that. Whatever is done is never enough, So we just pursue this. The answers lie in non-emissions intensive technologies. It's not going to be achieved easily. It'll take 25, 30 years. And I always go back to something Elon Musk said before he became famous or infamous. Using the parallel or the metaphor of a giant meteor heading towards planet Earth, he said, yes, by some readings, it is climate change catastrophe is hurtling towards us, but I believe its trajectory will change at the last minute, and we will record this historically in 80 or 90 years as a near miss. That is my own personal view of how things will play out. And the answer will lie not in international conferences, but in the adoption of technology.
And on that, I thank you because we will talk more on that particular issue. The deep geothermal generation will only go ahead if, it can be done safely, sustainably, economically, blah, blah, blah. How long are we away, do you think, from that juncture point?
Well, we've got the authority from this government to drill the first of 3 research wells.
Yeah.
These are not commercial wells. They will not produce any energy that's usable. They will give our scientists, who are absolutely world class. I mean, don't forget, New Zealand's not a small country here. New Zealand's the 5th largest producer of electricity in the world, in absolute terms, from geothermal. So we've got form here. If this is a relative success, and there's a lot of risk around this, we will then get the authority, I'm certain, from this government to drill 2 more. And then the analysis will start. It'll start, first of all, from engineers and scientists, but it will very quickly spread like wildfire to energy-using companies internationally. So, my gut feeling is if we're optimistic and think this is going to work, I think in 5 years' time, we might start to see the beginnings of commercial use of this extraordinary resource we have in the Turpal Volcanic Zone.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And nice to talk to you again, Tim. Look forward to catching up with you again
Thanks,
soon.
Michael.
Have a great rest. Okay. Tim Groser, former Minister of Trade, former diplomat, and now full-time, I have to say, booster for deep geothermal generation. You can actually go online, GNS Science. They are the XDSIR, I think. Geothermal, the next generation. And you can go online and see it. If you think it's all fantastic, it's all bullshit and pie in the sky stuff, I can understand you thinking that, but there is an awful lot of science behind it, and they are quite serious about it. And this government is sinking a fair bit of money into it. So let's just hope it does work.